the awareness and the reality that children in developing countries are hidden at home. Some are even kept in cages. Some are not allowed to go to school. Some are not allowed to work. Some of them are intentionally put on the streets to beg because people feel sorry for someone missing limbs. And they end up becoming the breadwinner for their family. So those realities of a life with a disability in another country, those have been brought to life because I've had that chance and that opportunity to see the world and not just stick to one or two countries. And it really makes, I think, my voice, it reminds me and it makes me aware of the fact that I need to use my voice and my story and the attention that it can get from the press to help really bring out the message that disability doesn't mean inability, that people with disabilities can achieve great things and they should be given the opportunities. They should not be stigmatized.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm super stoked today to be talking to Jessica Cox. I met her briefly years ago and it took quite a while to set this up for you, but her story is just so incredibly inspiring. She was born without arms, and that didn't stop her at all. She's got a pilot's license. She's got a couple of black belts. She's scuba dives. It's insane what this woman has done. You've also been the star of a documentary, Right Footed, and you've got a book out, Disarming Your Limits, which is a very clever title. And you're also doing coaching now, and so I'm really looking forward to talking to you. How are you, first of all?
Doing pretty good, other than the heat here in Arizona where I live, but it's been a good day.
Yeah, it's insane. The divide in Arizona between the air-conditioned interiors of buildings and cars, and then the roasting heat as you go outside to your car or to another building. It's such a contrast. So the first question I have for you is, unlike somebody who lost their arms in an accident, you were born without arms. So at what age do you remember being different from everybody else?
I started to recognize my difference probably as early as, I would even say, a year old.
Really?
I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that a 1-year-old would be aware of their own differences, but I think having the reactions from the outside world, it reminded me that I am different. My mom would tell me stories about taking me to the grocery store when I was just a little kid at 1 or 2 years old, and she'd have me in the shopping cart. And she'd be inundated with a lot of questions from people around her in the store, like, oh, poor baby, what happened to your baby? So those type of things I knew that my mom wasn't comfortable with. And that could have been as early as, like I said, it could have been as early as a year old when I started to recognize those feelings from the outside world.
It's so interesting that your sense of being different came from the outside world and not from your interaction with the world in and of itself. You're being told who you are and what you can do by people's reactions to you.
That's very true. It's interesting because I grew up in a family that really had unconditional love and acceptance for me. And, I am who I am, and this is my normal. And to them, I was normal. So it wasn't until the outside world told me that I'm different that I started to recognize that there is something different about me.
Where were you brought up?
I grew up in a small town, and that also helped with my sense of community. As I grew up in a community where a lot of people knew each other, and it wasn't like a big city. It was a small town in southern Arizona called Sierra Vista, Arizona.
Okay. And how big was your family?
I grew up with an older brother and a younger sister and 2 parents.
Okay. And how big is the town? I've never heard of Sierra Vista.
Well, Sierra Vista is right next to Fort Huachuca. Fort Huachuca is one of the oldest military army bases in the state. So it's historically known for being an old military base.
Okay. So going out, it would be like, oh, that's Jessica, as opposed to, oh, there's some girl without arms.
Well, being so close to a military base, there were a lot of transients, people who were traveling in from other parts of the world, being, active duty and the families that were coming and going. And so being a part of that community, we were used to having a lot of outsiders or people who were different or had different life experiences. And so being a part of something that was so worldly, it made it easier to be different, I should say. But on occasion, there were people that really brought the awareness to me that I am different. I'm not like all the other children.
Okay. And how difficult was it navigating the world of, that's designed for people with a couple of arms as you were growing up?
I didn't see my world any differently than anyone else growing up with arms. I
So,
mean, yeah, I did have maybe I sensed the world through my toes, through my feet, and that was my understanding of how to do things.
so how did you, I don't know, take notes in school?
Taking notes in school, I would just sit on a chair and grab the notebook out with my foot and grab the pencil between my toes, and I'd write my name down or notes down just as fast as any other student. It wasn't different for me. Yes, I did have a special desk. So when I was in first grade, I was given a special desk that had a slant, and it allowed it make it easier. It made it easier for me to use my toes and feet. And having that, which is almost like an art desk, it looks like a drafting table.
Okay, so it's
And
slanted
having
towards
that,
you a little bit.
yes, yes,
Okay.
exactly. So more of a slant versus this, straight desk, flat desk that all the other students had.
Yeah, my dad used to be a commercial artist back in the day, so I remember those slanting tables very well. So I meant you would put your like heel on the desk and then write with your toes.
Yes.
Okay. So here, I don't know. I mean, obviously the hand and the foot are pretty morphologically similar, than the fact that the thumb does oppose the other fingers in the way that the big toe doesn't. But are all the nerves the same? Like if you take a kid and make it use its feet instead of its hands, does that kid then develop as much dexterity in the hands just automatically? Sorry,
I
in the
would
feet?
say it's just as automatic as a child learning to use their hands. I will say there may be a slight delay between my brain processing something and wanting to do it with my toes
Hmm.
versus maybe a classmate who has hands. And the reason I know that is because we used to play like Jeopardy, where you'd have to press down on the button when you have an
Hmm.
answer. And I was always just a little bit slower than my classmates when it came to competition time. And I think it was just because the brain wave has a lot longer to travel to the
Hmm.
toes, to tips of the toes, versus how long it has to travel for fingers.
Well, in the worlds of high stakes teenage Jeopardy or preteen Jeopardy, every split second makes a difference.
It
Oh,
does.
okay. Now, you're unique, or not unique, because I do know other amputees and people who are born with congenital, loss of limb, in that you don't use prosthetics, or you haven't used prosthetics in quite a while. What kind of prosthetics did you have, and why did you get rid of them?
I had probably the best prosthetics you could get in the 90s. Now, naturally, the prosthetic arms have come a long way since the 90s. Now, I mean, they have bionic arms. They have arms that are connected to your brain waves, and
Hmm.
it's fascinating to see the development of prosthetics over time. But I never made the connection since I was given my first prosthetic at the age of 3. It
Hmm.
was not very natural. My toes
Hmm.
and feet they served me better than using these prosthetics, because you think about it, using a prosthetic limb, you have to think what you want to accomplish. Then you have to think about what you need to do in order to do it. So whether it was just opening the hook, which served as the hand,
Hmm.
I had to bring my shoulders in and contract my shoulders like that. And that is a lot. It takes a lot more time than the process of just grabbing it between my toes and picking up whatever it is I need to pick up off the table.
Okay. So you don't want a bionic arm now?
I know bionics have come a long ways, and the option of them would be out there if I wanted to pursue that. But I don't need prosthetics in any form, because
Hmm.
this is my normal, and it's as natural for me to use my feet and just to use what I have and what I've known as my normal, than learn to use something that, I mean, I think it would take more time, it would take more energy, it would be altogether more of an effort than using what I'm given.
So I had an encounter once with a guy who had a prosthetic. Well, I've already ruined the story. I was training Indonesian silat once, which is a martial art, and there's a drill in which you're banging forearms, basically for forearm conditioning. And I was working with this one guy, and it was just like getting clubbed by a rock. And then we trained for actually probably half an hour. And then I realized that he had a prosthetic, essentially a prosthetic fist. So I'd been
Oh man.
banging against this rubber over metal or something like that. And I believe, if I remember correctly, he'd lost his hand in an accident. And so do you think
Uh-huh.
there's a difference between people who like lose limbs later in life going to prosthetics versus people who are born without those? Do you think there's any pattern there?
Oh, for sure. There is a huge difference to have lost a limb, a hand, an arm, or a leg versus being born a certain way.
Mm.
Because if you've lost a limb, all you've ever known is what life was like with that limb. So having the option of prosthetics, it restores your kind of
Mm.
life. It gives you hope again that you have what you once lost. And I think that it serves a purpose for all the people who are considered amputees, people who've
Hmm.
lost limbs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if you went and chopped off my arms right now, obviously I would try to use my legs. Obviously, I would try to use my feet. But do you have any sense of how long, if ever, it would take to rewire those neurons and develop that dexterity? I'm imagining never. I imagine I could work on it for the next 50 years and not get close to where you're at.
I think the advantage I have is because it that I needed to develop those neurons early enough in
Hmm.
life when we are kind of learning our world and how we move and do things. So it's also it's I think it's dependent on age. I think
Hmm.
there's a certain
Yeah.
resilience and um,
Neuroplasticity at a young age.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
You ever been studied by a neurologist or uh, to see how you've made this adaptation so well?
I have actually been a part of a number of studies, some that included like an MRI,
Mm.
brain scan to see the active regions of my brain. Um, there was another study I did that showed, do I still have the brain mapping if I did have the arms or
Mm.
if I grew a set of arms? Sure enough, I still have the brain mapping. It's all still there.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Is it underdeveloped? Like, are there regions of overdevelopment and underdevelopment? Can they tell that?
There, yes, there were regions of overdevelopment when they were trying to see the areas of my brain that are more active, and they saw how some of them have kind of like are overdeveloped compared to the average
Yeah.
foot user.
Wow. So when they put you in the MRI, what images did they show you, or what did they tell you to do mentally? Because I'm imagining they're watching parts of the brain light up.
Yes, like one of the things they were doing, I think it was to envision certain tools. And I guess, I didn't fully understand that study, but one study that I was a part of in San Diego essentially created an image of a hand and an arm, and it put it made my brain, it tricked my brain to thinking that that was my hand and arm
Okay.
to see if I could sense what they were doing. They like pricked me or something with on my foot,
Hmm.
and they were trying to make the connection with this fake arm. And I actually made this connection to the arm, and it was really bizarre because I was like, I've never had arms. I don't even know what they look like from my perspective. And I was actually connecting with this fake limb in front of me.
Oh wow, it's amazing. I mean, I wish I had time to follow all the advances in neurobiology and neurology that are going on. I mean, it's just astounding, and hopefully you help move the science along.
I hope so. I think it's great to be a part of studies that help with the understanding, and I always want to make sure that the doctors and researchers are aware of the adaptability of someone without limbs, so that as a result of the new understanding, they don't force prosthetics on
Hmm.
children who are born a certain way. Now that they can understand that the body can adapt in ways that are amazing.
Yeah. So I really want to talk about your Taekwondo, and I really want to talk about your flying, and I really want to talk about your scuba diving. And I can't think of how to prioritize this. So why don't we go in chronological order? Which of those did you want to do first? Do you want to learn to kick someone in the head first, or fly through the air first, or dive underwater like a fish first?
Maybe we should do it at just the Taekwondo first, because that was my first
Okay.
experience before flying or
Yeah.
scuba diving.
It's a logical martial art for you. Why did you start training?
I started training just because it was one of those things as a kid when your mom brings yourself, your brother, and your younger sister to a class and they say, here, try this martial art out. The strange story behind that is I was at a public park at the home in my hometown, and there was a young girl there who was missing legs. Turns out she was born without her legs, and she was playing on the slide. And my mom struck up a conversation with her mother, and they started talking. And her mother told my mom that she had her daughter enrolled in Taekwondo. So it gave my mom the bright idea to bring all three of us to my brother, my sister, myself to Taekwondo classes. And she went in to talk to the instructor to find out, is this going to be okay for my daughter to be a part of this? And he said, as long as she has a good attitude. And with that, I started my journey of starting as a white belt and working my way up.
Okay. So you've got a black belt there?
Yes, so we had to do a couple modifications and substitutions so that for every hand movement, there was an equal substitution that could serve the same purpose.
Are you
For
talking for the
example,
forms or the self-defense exercises?
yes, for the forms, for self-defense, everything you can think of that has hand involvement, we had a substitution.
So
So
for
it was
example,
almost
instead
like
of a reverse punch, you're doing a...
knee strike.
Okay. Instead
Yeah, it
of...
started out with a front kick, and then we progressed to saying a knee strike would serve that purpose better.
Okay. And how was sparring?
Well, sparring was a little more challenging because we had to find ways in which I didn't get too close in, because obviously distance is a huge factor when you don't have the arms to defend yourself. And so it was always about keeping the distance and making sure that I was, reacting in a way that I needed to, and that I had counterattacks and things like that that allowed me to defend off my partner.
When I used to do a lot of kickboxing, I always really relied on my arms to act as a counterbalance. How did you manage the body balance issue?
What's interesting is when you are born without arms, you have to develop a better sense of balance. And I think that was just critical because when I was starting to learn how to walk, would fall a lot. And if you're falling when you don't have arms to catch yourself, you'd hit your head. And so I had to develop balance as a very important aspect of not getting hurt. And for me, my balance is a lot better than probably the average person, but my center of balance is lower than the average person as well. So I don't necessarily need to counterbalance in the way that I've already adapted.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, your center of gravity would be lower. So the Taekwondo, what did it teach you, or was it just something that you did?
Taekwondo was something I did as a kid for a couple years, and then I made the decision to continue on with it as an adult during college. And I think that was when I started to really have it as like a lifestyle thing where I was going to practice at least once or twice a week, and it became a part of my everyday, and now I still practice it. So it was one of those things you do as a kid until I got to an age where I was making the decision on my own, do I want to pursue this? And I decided to do that.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, there's so many kids go through, get their black belt at age 14 and then just never do it again. That it's, if you go to the average Taekwondo school, it's probably, I'm guessing, 80% kids, if kids of 16 and under, and then a very small cohort of adults. So it's super cool that our grown-up is continuing on with it.
Yes, I love it. I still, I like the exercise that comes from it. I love having my shoes off, which works really well because you're on the mat without your shoes. There's a lot of ways in which I connect well with Taekwondo.
Any concerns about damaging your toes while you're kicking? If you kick into somebody's elbow, or given how important your toes are.
Yes, there are always the concerns of injuring my feet. I unfortunately was in a car accident as a passenger once where I had my feet resting on the dash of the car, and the airbags deployed at 260 miles per hour, whatever they deploy at. I didn't even see the bag deploy on me, but all I remembered is my feet were on the dash at one point, and now they were on the floor. So I was like, my feet had the impact of that airbag, and my right foot hyperextended the knee, and my left foot hit the windshield. Luckily, I didn't have any abrasions or there wasn't any blood, but it was such a strain on them that even years later, I'm still having to deal with a couple days if I overuse my legs and feet where I can feel that injury. So I always have to be careful of that and mindful of overuse because my feet are not only serving as feet, but they're my hands. And I notice even now after text messaging for a long day or a couple days in a row, my toes can feel overused.
So text messaging, what kind? Do you use an iPhone? Do you use
I use voice activation most of the time, but if
Okay.
I'm typing on a computer or scrolling or something,
So people
I'm
just
using
know
my
to
toes.
expect the voice garbled text messages from you with the spell check or the autocorrect putting in absolutely inappropriate terms. Oh, that's just Jessica.
I'm probably just as good as anyone else using voice
Yeah, no, I've
activation.
sent some
So yeah.
spectacularly bad voice to text because I'm using it a lot. But man, I look at it and I'm like, oh my god, how did Apple translate what I just said into what it just wrote? So
Yeah.
maybe maybe it's a whole new excuse that people can use for rage texting. I never meant to say that you're a giant freaking idiot. That's just Apple. I meant to say I love you. So, all right. How flexible are you?
Flexibility is something, again, second nature to me. I mean, I reach my foot up to my head on a regular basis to scratch my head if I have an itch. But I will say the flexibility between the right and left leg is not the same. So I do have a preference to and better flexibility with my right leg.
Because you're right-handed, right-footed.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, people think of, I'm right-handed, right-footed, but other than maybe, I don't know, snowboarders or skateboarders or, people who are doing board sports, they don't tend to think about which foot is dominant as well. Is it possible you're right-handed and left-footed?
Here's the thing. I don't know what hand I would be dominant with if I did have the hands. I mean, I have used prosthetics and they assume because I am right foot dominant, and I learned through therapy hours and hours of practice with the right hook. So that was the, I guess, assumption that was made.
Right.
But I don't know if I would be left or right-handed.
Yeah. Well, you're queen of busting assumptions, so who knows? So I also got asked, how do you put in contact lenses? That boggles the mind.
Contact lenses are not any different than, I mean, probably the average person would use the tips of their fingers to put in their contacts. I don't think I've watched my sister put hers in. But when I was given the option of contact lenses, I remember going to the optometrist and saying, can I get a pair of contacts? And they were just as supportive as they could be. They said, here's a whole box of contacts. You can go through the entire box if you have to. I got the first set of contacts in my eyes with no problem.
Oh,
So I just got to
very
balance them.
unusual. That's very unusual. Good for you. So
I was
okay,
pretty proud of it at the moment.
yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to think. I had wore contacts for a while before I had laser eye surgery, and I if they had just given me a box of contacts, that might just have been enough because it's probably on the 30th try that I got it in. So. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just thinking before we go off the martial arts thing, I was wondering if you ever tried savate. That's that French kickboxing where they wear shoes and they use the tip that's a hard shoe or hardish shoe. So they use the point of the foot kind of like a hammer. And so they're kicking with their toes, but there's some protection in there.
That might be something to try, but I have never tried that before.
Yeah. Well, see if you can use it in Taekwondo competition and just drop people with their the fact that they're just using this hard area and it creates a very different type of thing from like, I don't know, Muay Thai or even Taekwondo where it's like power because you don't have to hit somebody as hard if you've got a hard little hammer, right? And obviously power helps, but I've only played a little bit with it, but it's also a very elegant martial art. That's it. The French, of course. Of course, they're going to do it elegantly, probably while smoking a cigarette, but they're going to look good doing it.
That's something I'm going to look up after this interview.
So where did the flying come in? Where did you get the seemingly crazy but ambitious idea of becoming a pilot? That's an ambitious thing for anybody.
Well, flying was another one of those, random opportunities that crosses my path. And
Mm,
I'd never been up in a small plane my entire life. And sure enough, right out of college, I was looking for my next challenge. This unique opportunity of going up on my first flight in a small plane came about. And I said, well, I guess I need to try this out. I was a little hesitant because I was terrified of it, but my dad was an aviation enthusiast. He was excited for me, and I went up on my first flight. Sure enough, I said, I want to do what it takes to become a pilot. And I needed a challenge. It was the right time in my life. I needed something after college to pursue. And I wanted to be an example to other people, not to let fear stand in the way of an opportunity. Because as a speaker, as a coach, I have to
hmm
live that example out in my own life. And I thought, well, let me do that. And it worked out. It worked really well. It empowered me to do something despite the fear of it.
So, are you in general, if you feel that tingle of fear, is that something that you then start trying to move towards?
It's so funny because just today I was thinking about, I was getting a little apprehensive because I knew I needed to get my plane over to a mechanic shop. Just to clarify, this plane that I don't personally own, but my foundation that serves people with disabilities owns this airplane. And we need to get it to the shop to have some things done, an oil change and all sorts of things. And I was starting to get a little apprehensive because I was thinking about how nervous I am when I'm navigating away from my home airport. Flying
Mm,
around in the pattern is one thing because you're familiar with it. But then I started to notice how uptight I was getting and nervous about going to another airport. But that fear is still in me, even when I'm thinking about what I'm doing with the airplane. It's interesting. It's still a
hmm
little bit a part of me. It keeps me on my toes, which
Yeah.
is probably a good thing. And it does serve me at times. Other times it does cause a lot of stress.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're still on your toes. I remember talking to helicopter pilots and them talking about the phenomenon where the rate of crashing is fairly high per hour flying initially, like right after you get your helicopter's license, and then high as people get older and much more complacent about the whole thing. But the sort of the
Huh.
sweet spot is in the middle of their career. Is it, I don't know if that was one guy telling me that, or if that is a phenomenon. Uh, do you know if that's a common thing?
I think they say that, I guess the first 500 hours or so, you're supposed to experience some kind of engine failure. I don't know, how that relates as far as
Hmm.
complacency. That might just be, if you're up there enough, you'll eventually
Yeah.
experience it. I don't know the exact research behind it. I have heard some research, though, about
Hmm.
that.
Have you had engine failure?
I have not had
Okay.
engine failure, but I have had experience a near miss in
Oh,
the
really?
pattern from about 100 feet from below me. I was in the pattern and I had the right of way. A student pilot was coming in on his cross country from another city and he was doing all of his radio calls incorrectly. And then he was a high wing, I was a low wing. We didn't see each other. He never even knew I was there in the pattern. And
Wow.
until we broke away and I was like, wow, that was so close. And we ended up letting him know what had happened since he was a student pilot, just so that his instructor was aware of it and could teach him from the experience.
Okay. So I'm just trying to visualize this not being a pilot. You're going round and round in like big circles around the airport, basically.
More like rectangles around the airport. Yes,
Okay.
that's how the pattern works.
Okay. And he's under you, but he has no idea that you're above him.
Exactly. And because I'm a low wing, there's no way that I can really see him.
Oh, low wing meaning that the wings are below your cockpit.
Yes.
Okay.
And he's a high wing, so wings are above him. So there's visual barriers.
Oh, wow. What's the longest distance that you've flown? Like you've done some cross country stuff. Obviously, you're
I
getting your plane to the mechanics.
Yes, we actually just got back from a very long flight across the country. Just for context, this type of airplane, you don't necessarily take it across country because it's not like something that you can get across in like 4 or 5 hours.
Hmm
It took us about 60 hours round trip to take
Wow.
it from Tucson, Arizona to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where the Wright brothers first flew. And I think my longest leg was a 3-hour leg from College Park, which is the CFRA. It's kind of a restricted area where you have to get fingerprints and special permission to fly into this area because it's so close to DC.
Mm-hmm.
We took off out of College Park, which is one of the oldest airports in the country. From there into Kitty Hawk was approximately 3 hours of flight time.
Okay. So I now know the difference between a high wing and a low wing plane, and I now know that you had a low wing plane. But the other thing I know about planes is there's kind of the big steering wheel, and there's a whole bunch of levers and a whole bunch of buttons, and then there's pedals. So how do you navigate all those different things that you need to control?
So the pedals of the airplane I fly are inexistent. There are rudders and ailerons. The rudder pedals are what you're referring to as the pedals.
Okay.
The rudders exist, and the ailerons are interconnected with the rudders. So because there's two less controls, which most pilots flying, say, a Cessna, which is probably the most generic plane you can think of, they would have their feet on the rudder pedals, both feet, one on each pedal, and then one hand on the throttle and one hand on the yoke. Well, the airplane that I fly is called an Air Coupe. It's a 1946 Air Coupe airplane. And so it only has a yoke, throttle, and all those controls that you're thinking about on the control panel, like the altimeter and all those different things. But you're regularly having only two active limbs flying the plane.
Okay. So it didn't require any special modifications?
No, it did not.
Cool. So I'm trying to imagine this, and I've got to look it up or watch the documentary. So you're sitting and you're bringing your legs up, and then you're just using your feet on the controls. So there's not like the seat isn't higher or backwards or anything.
No, it's just I mean, I have a little tiny cushion below me to elevate me just a slight bit.
Okay.
But other than that, my feet are crisscross on the controls. It's a pretty awkward position, but it works because the seats are locked in place. They're not like other car seats you can slide back. So because of that, I have to cross my legs in order to have enough room.
Okay. So have you ever pulled into an airport and gotten out of the plane and had the people just lose their minds?
Most people know about my story, so that's kind of hard to pull off, at least in the United States.
Okay.
About pulling off. And the Air Coupe itself is a unique sight, so people are pretty fascinated by that plane, and it tends to be the attention getter, more so than the pilot in the Air Coupe.
Yeah. So especially, I suppose, the buffs who sit at every airport and like, oh my God, that's a, I don't know, a DC 12345 Model B A3. Oh, I've scratched that off the life list. So I don't understand. Like, I understand being enthusiastic about stuff. I understand about, birders, maybe because I'm a biologist by training. I can understand people getting excited about seeing birds or seeing flowers, and bless them. I've got no problem with them, but people who sit at the edge of an airport and just watch the planes coming in all day long, I just don't get it.
If you go to the airport long enough, you'll catch on. It'll kind of grow on you.
That's just what I need is one more obsession and one more fascination and one more way to spend my time. Thank you. So when it comes to flying, what's your favorite part about it?
I think for me, the fact that I'm flying the plane by myself, and every pilot celebrates a good landing. There's a lot going on when you land an airplane. For one, you're not used to the ground coming at you from that angle. So that was almost like a learning curve for any pilot. It was especially difficult for me to learn how to land. And, some pilots have a tougher time at landing, but for me, I'm celebrating the landings. So the moment I land and climb out of that plane, it's just a sense of accomplishment that I did that. And it's just, no matter how many hours I put in as a pilot, I still celebrate a good landing.
Yeah, well, a good landing is one that you walk away from, they say.
Yes, that's that famous quote. Any landing is a good landing as long as you can walk away from it. Something like that.
Yeah, I've been to a whole bunch of airplane crashes, and most of them people do walk away from. They're bad airplane crashes compared to reasonably minor airplane crashes are pretty rare. Have you ever had a minor crash?
No. I mean,
Huh?
I'm actually surprised you're saying you've been to a couple of them. That's not the experience of most people.
Well,
So,
I work as a firefighter, and we've got an airport in our municipality.
oh,
So,
okay.
we get scrambled all the time for, somebody who's, landing gear can't come down, or they're,
Uh-huh.
uh, that's probably the most common one if they don't know if their landing gear is down or not, or if, one wheel comes down or after the fact. So, uh, I think I get a disproportionate number of airplane crashes in my life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
kind of, I would think it'd be a little traumatizing for a pilot to have to see that just because, I have not seen as many. I
Mm,
mean, I've heard of them.
mm,
Being in the community long enough, you've heard of people who've gone through them, and unfortunately, some people who've lost their
mm,
lives to them. Um, but I've been fortunate enough not to have to experience too many of those.
mm,
I haven't had any of those
yeah.
experiences.
Well, I'm very glad for you. But really, any community is going to have that, right? If there's going to be hunters, right? Eventually,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be a hunter who gets run over by a bull or shot by his buddy. Paddlers, it's not a good thing, but I've known a bunch of people who are really passionate about it. Some of them aren't with us anymore. The mountaineering community, the jiu-jitsu, all of these things, they have dangers. So how do you sort of balance the equation of danger versus reward in choosing your activities? Because they're not the safest of activities. Taekwondo, not super safe. Flying a plane, not super safe. Scuba diving, which you haven't got to yet, not super safe. So what's your calculus there?
I think it's just about really balancing it, and any activity to a certain degree is unsafe. And if you can just approach it in a very responsible manner, I mean, for example, if I know that my limits are when my feet start to hurt practicing Taekwondo, or like 2 nights ago, I think I may have pulled something in my knee. So instead of going to class last night, I ended up just staying at home. So it's really
Hmm.
about self awareness and really judging that from a responsible perspective.
Yeah. I suppose also the self-discipline to pull the pin, right? You're about to go do something really fun and you really want to, but then you're kind of being a grown-up about the whole thing, going, no, today I shouldn't. It's kind of like
Yeah.
knowing when to turn back on the route up to Everest or something.
Exactly. And somehow there's this thing with three things happening as a pilot. So if three things start to stack up when you're flying, one morning I remember it was like I had a magneto issue on the airplane, and then my headset batteries died, and I was like, okay, I don't know if I should go forward because it's this rule of three.
Hmm.
And sure enough, it was one of those days I was being stubborn and I went up in the air, and that's when the near miss happened. So
Okay.
if you're aware of that, I don't know what it is, but myself and another pilot have noticed that whole rule of three.
Yeah.
If three things are happening wrong, it might just be a good idea to turn
Yeah.
around or just to not do something.
I would agree. I mean, having, done postmortems on firefighting incidents, say, or looked at deaths in the outdoors, it's usually not just one thing going wrong. It's usually a couple of things going wrong. The guy's, tired and the radios didn't work and, something else. It's not, I mean, I suppose we could all be struck down by one thing, but usually it's
Mm-hmm.
a cumulative errors or cumulative problems that are adding up. So is that a
That's
pilot
true.
thing, or is that a Jessica Cox special? The rule of threes when it comes to flying.
That might just be between myself and another pilot I
Hmm.
talked about. But one of the things you are taught when you're training is to be ahead of the airplane.
Hmm.
And at all times, you're always one step or a couple steps ahead of the airplane. The moment you fall behind the airplane is when you know you could be in potential danger.
Okay. So, I mean, you've done all these super cool things, but you've also done a whole bunch of awareness building around people with disabilities. I mean, we're including like the human rights work through the UN. So was
Mm-hmm.
that when did that start becoming important to you, as opposed to just checking off yet another thing on the life list?
One of the things as a speaker is I am open to international invitations from abroad, and now have gone to 27 countries around the
Wow.
world. And I think it opened up my eyes to the reality that if I was born somewhere else in the world, there is a good chance that I wouldn't have been, there is a very good chance
Hmm.
that I wouldn't have been able to do as many things as I've been able to do here with obviously being born in the United States
Mm-hmm.
and having a disability and being allowed to go to school, but the awareness and the reality that children in developing countries are hidden at home. Some are even kept in cages. Some are not allowed to go to school. Some are not allowed to work. Some of them are intentionally put on the streets to beg because people feel sorry for someone missing limbs. And they end up becoming the breadwinner for their family. So those realities of a life with a disability in another country, those have been brought to life because I've had that chance and that opportunity to see the world and not just stick to one or two countries. And it really makes, I think, my voice, it reminds me, and it makes me aware of the fact that I need to use my voice and my story and the attention that it can get from the press to help really bring out the message that disability doesn't mean inability, that people with disabilities can achieve great things and they should be given the opportunities. They should not be stigmatized.
Yeah, I've heard horrendous stories along the lines of what you mentioned. I mean, it's not even just with disabilities. In some countries, it costs so much money to send a kid to school that the family then has to make a decision. Do we send our boy to school or do we send our girl to school? And imagine then if you added in a congenital loss of a limb or any other kind of disability, that decision is going to be a lot clearer to the people in question, to the parents. And it's just, so what could be done about it though?
I think a lot of times it's attitudes. It's also the stigmas. There are cultural stigmas that exist because I've been able to see them and I've been able to hear the stories and experience them on my own. I remember being in it was Ghana, Africa, and experiencing this stigma, being in a small community where a group of elders came into the big celebration that I was attending, and there was he was considered the king of this village or this little area, and I was there celebrating next to him, and my husband was there. We had another friend there, and then these elders looked at me like with utter disgust, and I could feel this like glare from across the room, as if I shouldn't have even been there and I shouldn't have been alive or something. It was a terrible feeling. But it was a reality that there are these stigmas that cultures have about people with disabilities. And they exist all over the world, unfortunately.
I'm not saying that it was right at all, but what do you think was going through those Ghanaians' heads? Or what was the specific, cultural narrative around somebody with disabilities in that case?
I know from being in the capital just days prior, I was there to speak in the capital in Accra, Ghana. So Accra is the capital of Ghana, and I was there at the big auditorium. It was a big theater, and right before I spoke, a young woman came up to me who was also born without arms, just out of the blue. She just said, "I need to meet with Jessica." And of course, because she was there, they led her to the back to the green room where I was getting ready to speak. And she sat down with me and she said, "I'm so happy you're here in Ghana, Jessica, because the reality is that when she was born, her father left her mother, blaming her mother for giving birth to a child without arms. Her community advised that they drop her off in the middle of the wilderness and essentially she'd fend for herself and be left there to die. But her mother decided to keep her in hiding, raised her up, and she is now a school teacher. So she got the education she needed to teach, but she could have been left to die in the wilderness, and that's still being done, unfortunately."
Yeah. Is it that those children are seen as, I mean, they bring shame on the family, or they're sign of the devil's work, or like what is the belief around that? It seems insane by our standards.
It's
What is the narrative that we need to
combination of
counter?
those things. I mean, some cultures don't even believe that. They believe that twins are some kind of, you've heard that before.
Yeah.
So I think there's just a whole bunch of stigmas. I don't know, I've been hearing different things here and there. I mean, I don't know them exactly, but yeah, that they are shame on the family, that they are curse, and it's just unfortunate.
Well, I think the power of an example is just so powerful. To have somebody like you go into a country like that and demonstrate firsthand. I don't know, screw all you. I have value and I've achieved stuff, and here's what you guys are missing out by kind of writing off this segment of the population. Because it's not just necessarily good for the people with disabilities, it's also good for society in terms of utilizing those resources.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go and do your talking as opposed to your coaching, how do you typically go into, who brings you to Ghana? Who brings you to one of the other 26 countries you've been to in addition to Ghana?
Usually events happen in different countries. Like for the most recent international travel I did was Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and then I went to China and South Korea and the Philippines. But Egypt was a World Youth Forum. So there was the annual World Youth Forum that happened in December every year. And they had the youth from all over the world come in for that. And that invitation was just because it was an event. Sometimes locals will bring me in because they want to put together events. And they will put together a big event. Like Ghana was someone who was local to the area decided to bring me in to do a tour of Ghana, and I spoke at 7 different areas. Of course, there were areas where I had to have a translator because not everyone speaks English. So language is never a barrier. But so it always depends.
Okay. And what's the central message that you're bringing when you're doing that? Like how do you frame it?
I think that everyone is going to take away something different from my message. So I do share the message, achieve the impossible. I share the message of the importance of giving people with disabilities the opportunities and protecting them and not hiding them in home and those type of messages. But I think everyone takes away something different. The message of you can accomplish anything you want to accomplish, never give up. There's all those different messages. And I think to each his own. I deliver a certain set of points that I like to cover, and I like to tell stories because stories are always memorable. But every person does take away something important and personal to them.
Yeah. I don't think that your message is limited to the non-disabled. I mean, that's ridiculous. Everybody has challenges in life, even if, to the outside observer, it looks like they're doing just fine. They have some kind of challenge somewhere. So what aspect of your journey do you share the most that has the biggest effect on people trying to break through a barrier?
One of the stories that I shared, and I shared this with you a little earlier in the interview, was how I gave up using prosthetic arms. And I wore them for 11 years. I mentioned my first set was at the age of 3. But wearing them for 11 years, and that message that everyone has their own set of prosthetic arms, I've noticed that is a very powerful message that resonates with everyone, because everyone has, certain roles that they feel like they're pressured to fulfill or to live up to a certain standard and not be true to themselves. And that's something I think is a very powerful message for many people.
Okay. How is the talking that you do different from the coaching that you do? Who are you coaching, first of all?
I coach people who have specific goals that they want to accomplish. And there are a lot of things that we're not always aware of that stand in the way, a lot of blinders that we don't realize rule our life, or that story that we tell ourselves about our lives, or whatever it is that's happened. Sometimes it's something traumatic. And I'm not a therapist by any means, so I don't work through those type of challenges. I just help people accomplish their goals and to set a goal for themselves, break down this goal, and the same message that I have of thinking outside the shoe, I share that on a one-on-one level. And it's very rewarding. It's more intimate and personal when you do that one-on-one with someone versus speaking to a large audience, which I do. The majority of my time on the road is speaking to large groups. Recently, with the COVID challenges, naturally is had to go. I just delivered a speech earlier today that was digital, and it was pre-recorded. And essentially, they're going to take that pre-recorded speech, they're going to chop it up, edit it together, and then they bring me back on live for Q&A. But it's pre-recorded, so it's changing the speaking world for sure. But coaching is a more personal level of helping someone get through their obstacles and accomplish their own goals.
So can we, in terms of breaking a goal down into tasks, that's something really interesting to me because I think everybody's heard this, but people internalize this very, very differently. So let's say my goal is to, I don't know, get my purple belt, my blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So that's, takes most people a couple of years, right? So I started training in the sport, and I assume that you're vaguely familiar with Jiu-Jitsu, right? Rolling around on the ground trying to choke each other silly.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm assuming you haven't done too much of it. Am I correct there?
The last summer I had a kind of intro class into jiu-jitsu.
Okay. So you have
Yes.
a basic idea, but how would you approach helping this hypothetical person who's trying to, do a quite difficult thing? It takes 2 to 3 years of fairly intense training for the average person to achieve it. What does breaking it down look like? They have their goal, but
Uh-huh.
what's the breaking down process?
It's teaching them the goal making process, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. Many of the people who listen to you, the SMART goal system, and making sure that they have these goals, they've communicated with them, and I'm holding them accountable to their goals that are realistic, and that they have these timestamps on what they're going to achieve, so that they can get closer to that goal.
Can you just go over the SMART goal system for us?
Sure. Everyone has a different interpretation of the SMART goal system, but S, specific, M, measurable. Some people say that's motivating, but I've been learning the method with measurable. A is for achievable. R is for my particular model that I'm learning to teach with. It's the reasons that you want to accomplish your goal, because the reasons are what keep you invested in pursuing your goal. And T is time, the time that you want to set aside to be able to accomplish the goal.
Okay. Where do you think most people fall down in that before they get help?
Everyone obviously has the reasons for their goal. So it's not the reason, it's not time. I think sometimes we get carried away and make it with the specifics of it on occasion, and the achievable level of accomplishing it. If you break it down and make it easier and more achievable steps, it makes it easier. But everyone wants to be ambitious or do something intimidating, and then they can get defeated when they don't accomplish it.
Right. So do you advocate like writing it down? For example, one thing I've started doing for really big projects is actually spreadsheets. And I got this idea from a world-class ice climber who, for doing a big project, he'd have like a spreadsheet with different tabs for like, equipment, food, permits. Who does he have to talk to? Partners, filming, publicity, sponsorship. And then in each of those tabs on the spreadsheet, he'd have all the sub steps broken down that category. And I started using this for bigger projects, and it's something I never thought I'd be doing. Like, let me consult my spreadsheet about what I should be doing today. But man, it worked really well.
I might have to borrow that spreadsheet sometime, because that is right. The power of writing down something, having a vision board. I'm a very visual person. So for me, I put a lot of emphasis on what it is that you're seeing that you want to accomplish. I always share the example of how when I was flying and training, it took 3 years and 3 instructors, 3 different airplanes. But I had this vision board of what it looked like when I was flying, and I would every couple days, I envision what it was like to fly that plane, spend a couple seconds closing my eyes and feeling what it was like. And it's amazing how if you have that intention and that vision, it will, the clearer it is, the easier it is to accomplish.
Yeah. The power of visualization is just amazing. What do you do for people who aren't so visually oriented? Say they're kinesthetically oriented, or they're, speech oriented or auditorily oriented. Do they just have to use it as a mantra instead of visualization? What do they do?
That's so funny because I think back to when I was getting over my own hurdle as a speaker, because when I'm speaking and people are listening, not everyone's getting it because, as you mentioned, some people are kinesthetic, some people need to have hands-on or experience. So
Hmm.
I learned to, and even on the stage, incorporate that for the few people out there, or the many people out there that need that. And it really does impact them tremendously. Like, for example, I will do something when I'm speaking. I'll say, okay, turn to your neighbor without using your hands. Greet them with a foot five. Or I'll say, here, everyone has a pencil and a piece of paper in front of them right now. Without using your hands or arms, I want you to somehow get that piece of that pencil and write out your name. And they will struggle, but they will love that experience.
Okay. So it's a involvement device that also changes their perspective.
It
That's
does, yes.
that's so cool. What are some of the upcoming challenges that you've got your eyes set on right now, or do you stay super secret until they're achieved?
Well, I think it's great to verbalize what you want to accomplish because you make it
Hmm.
more real when you share it with other
Hmm.
people. So, one of the things that we've been discussing here in the last 2 days is this grand goal of a custom airplane built to be flown just with your feet, and I should say my feet,
Hmm.
and anyone else who uses their feet. Because as we discussed earlier, the design of the Aircoup airplane that I fly is somewhat precarious with my feet crossed on the controls and elevated. It's not the most comfortable for long distance flight.
Hmm.
But we are setting this goal right now. It's just becoming very clear of a custom kit airplane. So airplanes can be built from a kit in the same way you'd build anything from a
Hmm.
kit. There are airplane kits out there, and you'd build it. It would take years to build, but customizing it so it's a lot more comfortable and designed for someone who could use their feet to fly it.
Wow. Well, I hope that if you need any engineering or manufacturing or specialty custom work, that you could just put out the word and that somebody would take this up as a challenge. I have none of those specialties, so I can't help you with it, but I can get the word out that you're looking for somebody. That'd be so cool.
Please. That would be
Yeah.
great. Engineers, people who have, that engineering mentality, which is a
Yeah.
gift to be able to see a goal come to life, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how when you're dealing with engineers, they think that every problem is solvable. Like it doesn't matter if they don't know anything about it. They just have that confidence that there is a solution somewhere. And I suppose that's similar for you, right? You didn't know how you were going to fly the plane, but you figured that you probably could figure it out. You know, it's a
Yeah,
very resilient mindset as opposed to the immediately defaulting to I can't.
there's a certain level of engineering, yes, in a world which requires two arms for the most part. For some people, they think. But yeah, there is a certain level of engineering that to make it work.
Hmm. So tell me a little bit about your foundation.
I started a foundation about 4 years ago now, and it has allowed me to pursue mentoring more children without arms.
Hmm.
It has allowed me to grow a social media following of up to 10,000 to bring awareness and to educate, to teach different techniques of how you can live life easier without your arms, how to be more confident about yourself, certain tools that you use in everyday life. That social media channel is called Life with Feet.
Hmm.
And we really work to bring awareness out there and to teach and facilitate a community of people who are have limb differences. And then the nonprofit also serves with advocacy in aviation. And that's why we
Huh.
took this last trip all the way to the DC area so that I could fly Senator Harkin to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, taking him up on a flight because he was a lead sponsor in the Senate in 1990 when the ADA was passed.
Okay.
He's
What a
committed his
neat
life.
30-year anniversary celebration for him.
He said it was one of the most fun activities he did to celebrate the 30 years.
Yeah.
He's also a pilot.
Yeah.
So
I bet he didn't see that one coming 30 years ago.
probably not. I
Yeah.
don't think so. He was so ecstatic to be there.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. So that's your your social media channel on that. What is your personal social media channels? What's your website, and how do people reach out to you? Because I'm sure this will resonate deeply with some people.
You can go to Jessica Cox YouTube channel. You can go to JCMS Official. That's my Facebook page.
Okay.
And if you want to connect on the coaching, please go to possiblethinking.com.
Okay. Your personal Instagram, or do you share that? I can edit this out if you want to keep that secret.
Oh no, the Instagram, please. Yeah, it's right-footed is my Instagram.
Okay. So you're in a little bit the same situation as I, where you've registered all these different accounts at different times, not thinking, wouldn't it be simplest to just have one? I am Jessica Cox Pilot or whatever on every platform. The things that we learn after we've done them.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jessica. It's been really cool to peripherally bump into you these days, and maybe one day we'll trade some jiu-jitsu training in exchange for a flight.
That would be awesome. Thank you. Glad to be on.